Edgar Allan Poe, one of America's most important writers, lived in this house, briefly in the 1840s. He was born in Boston on January 19, 1809. His mother, Elizabeth Arnold Poe, was a very talented actress and popular with theater audiences. His father, David Poe, was a less successful actor. Tragically, Poe's mother died of tuberculosis when the boy was not yet 3 years old. His father had disappeared earlier. Orphaned in Virginia, Edgar was raised by a Richmond merchant, John Allan, and his kind-hearted wife, Frances. The Allans lived in England for 5 years, where Poe attended boarding school. After they returned to Richmond, Edgar entered the University of Virginia. He was only 18 years old when his first book, Tamerlane and Other Poems, was published in Boston in 1827. Like other poets of the Romantic era, he wrote of exotic eastern lands and peoples. Yet his own life was painfully realistic, a series of quarrels with his foster father over financial problems. After one such quarrel, Poe had gone to Boston to join the army instead of returning to the university. After 2 years and 2 promotions, Poe received an appointment to the military academy at West Point. There he wrote more poetry, and his Poems by Edgar A. Poe was dedicated to the cadets at West Point. Lack of money again dictated the direction of his life. He ended his stay at the academy after only 8 months and turned completely to his writing as a career. Poetry was his passion, but it did not sell as well as the short stories which he wrote for the literary and popular magazines of the day. In 1833, he was awarded the top prize of $100 by a Baltimore magazine for Manuscript Found in a Bottle, an adventure tale and early form of science fiction. At the age of 26, he joined the staff of the Southern Literary Messenger, a magazine published in Richmond, Virginia, his childhood home. This job led to a dream he pursued for the rest of his life: to own and edit a serious literary magazine. About this time, stories concerning the death of beautiful women, a theme common to many of his short stories and poems, began to appear in such tales as Morella and the horrifying Berenice. He also formed new family ties that were to be crucial to his joy and sadness in the coming years. With his new job, he was able to marry his beautiful young cousin Virginia, who was not quite 14 years old. Mrs. Maria Clem, her mother, lived with him and took care of the house. Her practical outlook on life provided stability to the Poe household. 3 years later, the family left Richmond and moved to Philadelphia, a larger city offering more opportunities for a writer and aspiring editor. Burton's Gentleman's Magazine hired Poe as editor, and he increased its circulation from 500 to 3,500 in just a few months. During this time, The Fall of the House of Usher was published, an example of Poe's pioneering use of symbolism as a literary technique. He invented the detective story, with the murders in the Rue Morgue, and wrote vivid horror tales such as The Pit and The Pendulum. Graham's Magazine hired him as an editor in 1841. He was becoming well known for his criticism and reviews of books and poetry. Again, he increased the circulation of the magazine from 5,000 to 25,000 subscribers. The Poe family lived in 5 different locations during their 6 years in Philadelphia. Virginia Poe enlivened their homes by growing flowers in the garden and entertaining their friends with her singing and music. Edgar was welcomed by the other writers and artists living in the city and met Charles Dickens at the U.S. Hotel. He corresponded with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, James Russell Lowell, and others concerning literary matters. These activities, however, were soon overshadowed when Virginia became seriously ill in 1842. Depending upon her condition, Poe's mood swung between gloom and optimism. Shortly after this, he left Graham's to try to establish his own magazine, The Stylus. But again, due to lack of money, his efforts failed and he lived hand to mouth by selling his stories and critical reviews to various magazines. In the spring of 1843, the Poe family moved to this location near 7th and Spring Garden Streets. His stories, Ligeia, The Telltale Heart, and The Black Cat were published while he lived here. The following year, the family moved to New York City. In 1845, The Raven was published, bringing Poe fame, but little money. However, with the popularity of this poem and his growing reputation as an author, Poe was able to borrow funds to become sole editor and owner of the Broadway Journal, a serious literary magazine. At last he achieved his dream. But his resources were stretched to the limit. The journal failed after 6 months. The following year, tragedy struck again. His wife Virginia died of tuberculosis at age 24. Poe's grief is immortalized in the famous poem Annabel Lee, a tribute to his love, which still is popular today. In the next few years after recovering from the loss of Virginia, he began to lecture to large audiences on The Raven, Eureka, and his theory that poetry was the rhythmical creation of beauty. Poe made plans to marry a childhood sweetheart, Elmira Royster, now a widow in Richmond. Another financial backer appeared, willing to publish a literary magazine with Poe as sole editor. It seemed as if his dream of financial success and literary fame were almost within his grasp. On September 27, 1849, Poe left Richmond for Philadelphia. He never arrived. 6 days later, he was found lying unconscious on a sidewalk in Baltimore. In another 4 days, he was dead. The reasons for his unplanned stop in Baltimore and his final illness are still unknown. Edgar Allan Poe himself remains surrounded by a sense of mystery and fascination. This house echoes the man, for no trace of his occupancy survives. Only the empty rooms which sheltered him and his family for a short time. Empty, yet fascinating, like Poe inviting further exploration.
Awesome. Okay, well, that was creepy at the same time.